Hello there. You're listening to the Box Office Show. I'm Dylan Johnson, and today I'm going to be talking about the box office numbers from last weekend and our box office predictions for this upcoming weekend. And then I'm going to be comparing the all new Inside Out 2 with its 2015 predecessor, the original Inside Out. All right, let's go ahead and do our box office breakdown for the weekend of June 14th to the 16th. Coming in first, no surprise to anybody, Inside Out 2 with a domestic gross of $154 million in its opening weekend. Monstrous. By far the biggest opening of 2024 so far. Absolutely dynamite. Huge numbers. I am beyond elated. I wanted it to surpass 100 million to be able to have like a good solid lead on Ryan in our box office draft, and it did just that and delivered even more. This was by far a very, very solid pick. I am incredibly satisfied, very, very happy, and I am looking forward to claiming that title at the end of the year when Ryan bows down on his knees and admits defeat. After Inside Out 2, in second place was Bad Boys Ride or Die with 34 million. Then in third place, Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes with 5.5 million, actually increasing in its total, which I think is interesting. It went up from the weekend previous, even though it went down in the total number of theaters it was being shown in. I don't know if they had some kind of return in the marketing campaign or if word of mouth spread around and people wanted to see it even more this weekend. I'm not really sure. Anybody who wasn't seeing Inside Out 2 maybe was just going and seeing Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes, but it's having very, very strong legs for it being this late out in the game. This is its fifth week, I believe. But man, it's holding on. In fourth place was the Garfield movie with 4.8 million. In fifth was If with 3.6 million. In sixth place was The Watchers with 3.5 million. Seventh place, Furiosa Mad Max Saga with 2.6 million. Eighth, The Fall Guy with 1.6 million. Ninth, The Strangers Chapter 1 with just a little under a million. And in 10th, The Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring 2024 re-release with 632,000. So what it looks like, looking at all these numbers, is pretty much Inside Out 2 dominated the weekend at the box office, and everything else was just there to fill in the gaps. Nothing else was doing dynamite numbers except for Bad Boys Ride or Die. So really, Inside Out 2 was by far the champion of this past weekend. Looking forward to next weekend. Unfortunately, there's not much coming out. A couple of small releases. The Bike Riders is getting its full wide release. I project no more than 10 million. It's not a big movie. It's going to do a lot of big numbers. It's got a lot of good actors attached to it. Austin Butler, Jodie Comer, Tom Hardy. You know, you've got people in there that people would want to see in a movie, but it hasn't necessarily gotten a lot of wide press release, and it's not necessarily a movie that's going to draw a lot of attention. Other than that, The Exorcism and Thelma are a couple of other smaller movies that are going to do low numbers. Not sure what, but certainly not double digits, not anywhere close. And now we can go ahead and move on to our main topic of discussion. I'm going to be discussing Inside Out 2 and comparing it to the original 2015 Inside Out, which I just rewatched recently. So I'm going to start there. I watched Inside Out, the first one, in theaters with my mother. I believe Ryan watched it with his mother as well a long, long time ago, but I'll save that for, I'm sure we'll eventually do a recap of all the summer films whenever he comes back from his hiatus filming his movie, and he'll catch up on all those releases he's missed, and he'll go through and really shout out all the things that he liked about all these different movies. That'll be a good episode to watch out for. But I was a big fan of the original Inside Out when it came out. I thought it was a good outing for Pixar, something that was very, very original and not a sequel at that stage in the Pixar game. I was looking at a lot of sequels coming out. Toy Story 4 had just come out a few years before. Monsters University was about to come out, I believe, around that time. So really not a lot of big standouts. The last one was WALL-E, I believe, in 2011-ish. So I was looking forward to a more original Pixar idea, something fresh, something new that would really shake me up, really, really get me going, like the old Pixar movies did. And this movie by far blew me away. I absolutely love the original Inside Out, and I completely forgot how much I liked it until I rewatched it recently. I don't think I've watched it many times since it came out, and that was almost 10 years ago. So, I mean, all of these emotions coming towards it have come back up, and just this feeling of overwhelming love and admiration for the process that went into writing that movie. The dedication to take using visual metaphors to uh, give life to these abstract concepts of emotions and thoughts and personality and everything built around your identity is so thought out and so intelligent and so cleverly dumbed down in a way to be so effortless that is completely admirable to the highest degree. Inside Out 1, I think, does the metaphors a little bit better just because they are handling a simpler topic. Of course, when you get to Inside Out 2, Riley is now a teenager. She's going through puberty. She's handling significantly more complex emotions than originally in the movie, than in the original movie. But let's start with those simple concepts that are done so expertly in the first Inside Out. The idea of being put through a relatively traumatic experience for Riley that's moving away from home, having everything that she's grown up with and everything she knows, her whole world that has built who she is, taken away from her and put her in a new place, and what that does for her emotions inside of her, and how her emotions affect what she does and how she reacts to things as she's growing up and dealing with this very, very tough situation that she's going through. Obviously, from the get go, we get the exposition that from the beginning there were emotions that came and were dictating her actions. They were the literal embodiment of what she feels. They have this control board that they can use to affect her actions as her emotions. And very quickly, as she grows and she learns more, we find that these emotions can create core memories, and these core memories create very strong uh, foundations to who Riley is as a being, and those are demonstrated through those joyous core memories that she has that creates those islands of personality that are behind our main characters, of course. And I think the demonstration that the core of our identity, especially at such a young age, is built upon what we have seen and what we have learned and what we have felt in the past, and how that creates this identity for us is so important because there's not a lot of self-reflection at this age, at this point. It is very much your identity is very much an extension of what you have experienced and your actions in those experiences and how that shapes you in a very unconscious sort of way, creates these islands that are the personality that is Riley. And I think that's very intelligent, very smart. And of course, when Riley is then presented with this traumatic experience of moving away from her home and being brought to San Francisco, and all her friends are gone, her whole life is gone, uh, the idea that joy and sadness, who are these conflicting that sadness is a character that has been pushed to the sidelines up until this point in Riley's life, is now trying to come to the forefront and trying to exercise her uh, her job, trying to do her job as sadness, to provide those feelings of sadness to Riley, and that joy is pushing her back. Is this metaphor of trying to push down that sadness and trying to keep it down because it's not a feeling you want to be feeling. And I think that's a very smart way to start this story of Joy battling, not battling, I guess, but Joy suppressing sadness from doing her job and not understanding her role in this sort of emotional collection. And then taking that idea and having joy and sadness be forced out of that control room into this whole deep consciousness situation, and having to fight their way back, and having Riley have to deal with all this tough situations, obviously not being happy, but also intentionally trying not to be sad. Taking those two core emotions of joy and sadness and rejecting those two specifically, I think is also very smart, because now she has to deal with these situations as a more mature person and is fighting through these feelings, not happy, of course, in her situation, but also not letting herself be sad. And the visual metaphor for that is that Joy and Sadness are now rejected out of Riley and are thrown to the back of the brain. And now, from a story perspective, Joy and Sadness, who are these sort of contradictory pair, have to go on this journey together to get back to the center of Riley's brain and bring back those core memories so that her personality stays the same. And of course, as they've removed those core memories, now the personality, those memories associated with that personality, are slowly bringing down those personality islands one by one, which is more devastating than I remember it being. I remember watching it this time as a grown adult, watching that first personality island crumble when Riley is in her classroom and she is remembering her past and is getting very, very sad about it. And so that personality of her past is crushed and crumbled down, and she loses a part of herself because of how traumatic this experience is, and isn't willing to like fight for that personality trait, is honestly a little heartbreaking. You watch Joy like visually become upset watching this personality of Riley fall down into the pit of the subconscious to never be seen again. And that is like a devastating loss to character, to have this part of you gone because you can't cope with what's happening. And that hurts. As an adult, knowing what these metaphors mean and really connecting with it, it really does hurt. But of course, this is a kids movie, and we're going to be lighthearted. And they go. There's a lot of jokes about memories. They play the Trident commercial, which is a really good bit that comes back and forth. They continue on their journey through a subconscious, and they come across Bing Bong, who is the imaginary friend that is still sort of lost in her subconscious, hiding around there and whatnot. And he tells them that he knows how to get to the train of thought, which is a very, very funny, clever visual metaphor. And the train of thought will lead them back to headquarters, essentially. And I think that's a very, very funny way. It is a funny movie because it takes these very, very complicated thoughts and it makes them so silly, and it makes them so understandable. The dream uh the dream center being this Hollywood machine, studio machine, trying to pump out these dreams based on Riley's real encounters in real life, and they're just pumping out dream after dream after dream. I think that's ingenious. I think the Imagination Land being this concept of anything could happen. This is like the land of creation where Riley can come up with anything she wants. She has her imaginary boyfriend who lives in Canada. The House of Cards sort of thing is very, very funny. And then having Bing Bong's whole, like, he's like the mayor of this imagination land, of course, because he is the personification of her imagination as her imaginary friend. You have the train of thought, of course. You have the center of the brain that tries to put effort into imagining abstract thought, where they go through and they become abstractions. I think that's really funny. Like trying to understand abstract concepts like doubt and like agony, and becoming different animated characters because they are being abstracted into nothing, and they go so far that they become two-dimensional and then fall flat on their face and can work their way through the door. It's like little visual gags like that are very entertaining, especially somebody who's interested in animation like me, to see that developed in the way that it is throughout the movie. I think is very, very fun. And then we go through that whole journey. Bing Bong and Joy eventually fall down into the pit of subconsciousness. I don't remember what it's called, but it's where memories go to die. Sort of, they can't be brought back. They are stuck down there, and that's a very sad thought, that Joy could get stuck down there, and that you will go the rest of your life without happiness, which I don't think is quite what they were trying to imagine. Of course, I mean, it would be hard to imagine a life without joy at all for the rest of your life. But it is like a darker thought when you were an adult rewatching this movie and you think about it. The idea that joy could disappear forever is a very sad metaphor to understand. But of course, they get on the Bing Bong's rocket and they catapult their way up, singing the Bing Bong song. And dude, Bing Bong's death is tragic. It's tragic for so many reasons, but especially because we all have that imaginary friend. We all have that even if you didn't have an imaginary friend, you have that concept of your childhood, the nostalgia that is brought towards that portion of your youth, the toys from that part of your life, the commercials you saw on TV, everything that's related to growing up when life was so much simpler, when there was less to worry about. Abstract concepts that could bring you back to that time simply by existing, having those things disappear from you, and the sadness that you can't remember it to be able to miss it is devastating. It's another devastating loss that is just a part of growing up. That you can forget these crucial things that were once so important to you, but then you can't even miss them because there's nothing left to miss because now they're just gone from your memory until somebody brings it up out of nowhere and then it unlocks something in you and you remember it, and it is like a bittersweet sort of feeling to remember something like that. Very recently I have the DVD copies of Gilligan's Island, and I was rewatching those recently, and that was something I used to watch when I was in middle school or something with my dad because he was a big fan of the show when he was growing up. They had reruns on when he was a kid, and I just remember so many of the bits and so many of the jokes, so many of the plots of the episodes, Wrong Way Feldman, things like that. That it was like a bittersweet feeling to watch them again. And it feels like a comfort blanket wrapped around you when you can enjoy these portions of nostalgia that bring you back to a specific time. And I'm diverging a little bit. I'm digressing a bit here because obviously Bing Bong's death is sad in the literal sense that Bing Bong is a character in this movie, and he was a fun character who was the vessel of how the story developed for the majority of the movie, and of course he's now dead. But I think the that is like the immediate sadness is watching Bing Bong, the actual character, die. But then the lingering sadness that stays with you, especially as an adult, is the realization of how Bing Bong is a representation of that nostalgia, of that portion of your life that you could miss, that you would never know that you're going to miss it because now it's just gone from your memory. And that's sad. It's sad that you can only remember so much, that your memory is only good for so many things, and that so much is going to be forgotten to you. Which is why I think a lot of people, including my roommates, they all write diaries or journals and whatnot just to keep track of things because they don't want to forget. But I think, for me personally, I don't think that's something I could do. Just because writing down the facts of my day, the facts of what's going on, that doesn't bring out any kind of emotional feeling to me. What brings out a feeling to me is if I were to go back and reread some of the writings that I was doing maybe in like later high school many years ago, and to reread those things and like cringe a little bit because it's not very good, it's very rough, it's a little stupid, it's not something I would ever do now, but it does bring me back to how I was feeling when I did write those things in a stronger way than if I had just written down what happened to me that day. Which is why I think a lot of people take creative liberties when they're journaling. They obviously try to write it in a creative fashion. It's not just a bullet point of things that happen in their day. But to me, it's more powerful when uh, I am brought back. I'm pulled out of my body into how I was and how I felt and how I thought at the time of reading those things. And it doesn't happen. Right? There's very few things that can pull me out of the present like that and directly plop me back into the past. So when I can come across something like that, it is a very odd feeling. Like Ryan, if Ryan was here, and I wish he was, because this would be a good conversation for him to be in when you do watch Inside Out 2, Ryan. I know you're going to listen to this episode eventually. You gotta bring this up to me, future me, in a few months when you do re-listen to this episode. Bring up the fact that I'm talking about this, but one of the things that brings me into the past like that is when you and I sat down and we played those PlayStation 2 games together, co-op at my dad's house. I whipped out my old PlayStation 2 and you brought your games. We played a lot of those games together. And the other time we did that when we were at Alexa's house, and we played Battlefront and Battlefront 2, and we were just co-op, couch co-op, instant action, sort of just plug and play, get in there and shoot at each other. That brought me back very greatly to that point in my life when I was 9 or 10, playing those games with my brother and just trying to keep up because he was just so much better than me at those games. And to relive those memories and those moments is such an odd but important thing. Nostalgia is such a strange thing to experience, especially when presumably I have so much life left to live. Hopefully, fingers crossed. And to still be taken back 20 years, 15, 20 years to those memories and to relive them is astounding. It's a truly crazy feeling, especially when it's something that I forgot that I even had ever seen, something I had ever been a part of, ever interacted with, and I'm reliving that memory and it's coming back to life. Like, I'm sure we all say Bing Bong is dead, but theoretically, if Riley is in her 20s and she's spending time with her parents, and her parents bring up her imaginary friend and they all think really hard together trying to remember what his name was and what that song was, somebody will remember. And Bing Bong will exist again in a very theoretical sense, as as theoretical as an imaginary friend can be, that he will come back in a way, and Riley will get to experience being with Bing Bong again and experience that nostalgia. So even though Bing Bong dies, in a way, hopefully in somebody's memory, Bing Bong will live on and be brought back at some point in Riley's very far future as purely as nostalgia. Hopefully. Otherwise, if nobody remembers, then Bing Bong truly dies. We all die twice. Once when we actually die, and once when the last person who remembers us dies. And that is sad. That brings us into Coco. No, I'm just kidding. Uh, After Bing Bong dies, of course, Joy has to go find Sadness, and Sadness is just wallowing in herself, thinking that everything's her fault. And at that point, Joy can piece together the puzzle that sadness is an essential emotion like all the other emotions, and that Riley needs to feel sadness in order to understand what is important. She needs to feel sadness in order to understand that everything's going to be all right, that she can't keep pushing this emotion away. So she goes, she finds Sadness. They ride the boyfriend's. She rides the boyfriend's, lands on the trampoline, grabs Sadness, lands at the headquarters. Very, very good bit. And then right now, Riley is trying to run away because of a bad idea that got out of hand. And none of the other emotions know how to do anything, which is, I think, the biggest drawback of this version of Inside Out, which we'll get to with Inside Out 2, is that the other three emotions, fear, anger, and disgust, they don't do too much, as much as I would like to see them do. I mean, they're there, of course, and they have a role to play, and they are trying to cover for Joy while she's gone, and they're not doing a great job because they aren't providing that emotional clarity that Riley needs in that moment. They're clouding her judgment unknowingly. But I wish they had a bigger role, and you see them get a bigger role in Inside Out 2, which becomes a positive. But it's kind of come and go. Some of them get bigger roles, some of them don't. But they're present more, at least in the second movie. Not that they necessarily do more, but they are present more for the bulk of the action. But we'll get there in Inside Out 2. In Inside Out 1, Sadness comes back. Joy lets her be the one who touches the console and frees Riley. And it's that overwhelming feeling of sadness, of missing her family, that gets Riley to get off the bus and go back home and cry to her parents. And it's a very sad scene because Riley cries about wanting to be strong for her family, wanting to be strong for her parents, and not being able to do it because she's just too young and just can't handle it. Her emotions aren't complex enough, and she isn't able to compartmentalize enough, which is fair. I mean, she's only 11 in the movie, I think, and it's just not something that an 11-year-old should be expected to do. So it's just too much, and sadness overwhelms her, which is a good thing because sadness means you can it means you can remember the bad times as well as the good times, and you can be objective about how you felt about things. And then, of course, his core memory forms, and it is a combination of joy and sadness. This feeling of sadness over having lost everything she had and having almost lost her family, mixed with the joy of her family being there for her and supporting her, creates this new core memory, which recreates Family Island, thank God. And then, flash forward to the future, the core memory duct that is in there is now filled with all kinds of core memories that are combinations of emotions, and there are dozens of islands now. Her personality is starting to bloom because now our emotions are mixing together, and she's allowing the complexity of emotions to take over how she feels and take over her personality. and is becoming a more full person as a result. And then there's a funny bit at the end where they come and they fix up the console, and you look at it and it says puberty alarm. Ha, big old joke for the future. Little do they know, here comes Inside Out 2, where that is the main topic of discussion. The puberty alarm is the arbiter of the action in this movie. So overall, Inside Out 1, fantastic. Great application of the of personality and trying to understand the the complexity of emotion and whatnot. Absolutely brilliant. Loved it. Um, Out of five Trident, I think that's the name of the fictional toothpaste Trident commercial jingles, I give it five, full five. Absolutely fantastic. Now moving on to Inside Out. As a result of puberty, the puberty alarm goes off. Big warning. Uh-oh. New emotions now arrive, of course, ennui, envy, embarrassment, and the big one, anxiety, all come as a result of puberty, which is a very, very, real and kind of scary thing to think about, that could happen to a child, that such complicated and somewhat bad emotions can happen to a child. And of course, this movie delves into the complexity of those emotions and how they aren't always bad things and how they can be useful when under control. Even anxiety, as negative as anxiety can be and seem to people, and how strong anxiety can have over people. Obviously, anxiety has its advantages at times. They say it pretty early on that fear is what protects Riley from physical dangers, and anxiety is what keeps Riley uh, safe from theoretical dangers, things like that, or emotional dangers, things like that. That is the role of anxiety. Embarrassment, obviously, is to keep Riley from acting too odd and upsetting other people around her. And ennui makes her cool, of course, which is always awesome. And envy creates desires that, when checked, can help form an identity. And that's really the big topic that gets brought up in the beginning of the movie, is the development since the first Inside Out movie is now these core memories are being ladled down into a pool underneath the headquarters, and those are creating more than just her personality islands, her full identity of who Riley is as a person in her own mind. And the thing that you hear when they ting it is that they flick the identity tree and it says, "I am a good person." That is the identity that Riley has created for herself and views herself as this good person. And obviously, when the new emotions come in, there is some tension. They try to handle a very complicated situation that Riley's being put in. Her friends are leaving her. She's at a hockey camp. She's trying to impress. She wants to impress the older kids and get on the team, but also her friends are there. But she's upset at her friends leaving. So her emotions are trying to balance all these things that she's feeling, and obviously they don't do a very good job, as we see very early on. Our main five emotions from the beginning of the movie get booted out almost immediately and sent back to way where joy and sadness were sent in the first movie, towards the deeper cortex of the brain. And anxiety gets full control over Riley. And that is obviously a very bad thing, as we know as adults, and probably kids know too. If you let anxiety control you, things will get out of hand. And they certainly do. Riley starts acting out. She starts choosing the newer, cooler kids over her older friends. She starts changing aspects of her personality, which obviously anxiety does by planting new anxious core memories into the pool and changing the identity tree so that she's no longer that old version of Riley. She's the new version of Riley that anxiety wants her to be. Anxiety controls her dream centers through imagination land, which I think is very smart. It kind of abandons the principle of the dream studio machine from the first movie, but it does make anxiety take control of her imagination land and use that imagination to create dreams via storyboards like animators, which I think is kind of funny, a little nod, and uses those anxiety driven imaginations to control Riley's actions and to make her more anxious. They are basically doing what anxiety does, predicting every possible outcome to a fault that becomes obsessive and controlling and insane and crazy. to the point where Riley can't decipher what's real and what's not and really get control of her emotions, which is something that I've certainly experienced as an adult. I'm sure many people have. Perhaps Ryan has as well. I don't know. But the idea of anxiety pumping out every possible scenario that you could imagine, that you could fathom, and putting that in front of you and making you think about it and consider it as an actual possibility becomes overwhelming very, very quickly. And that is one of the biggest side effects of anxiety. Sometimes anxiety is good because you can weigh possible outcomes against others, and it reminds you to do things that maybe you'd forget because you get this feeling inside of you that makes you worried a little bit if you don't do this thing. And anxiety has helped me in that regard, certainly, to have that little bit of twinge of I need to take care of this now because something bad could happen later keeps me proactive and keeps me from being lazy and reminds me, it's this gut feeling inside me that reminds me to do certain things. But of course, that is anxiety in small doses. Whereas in this situation, Riley has now been controlled by anxiety and she is just trying to keep up with what's happening. And that is obviously a very negative thing. And so the idea, I think, of using the imagination land as storyboard artists presenting possible scenarios for her to be anxious about while she sleeps is very, very smart. And it's also highlighting how active an anxious mind is even through sleep and how negative that effect is on a person. They wake up Riley while she's asleep to get her up early, to get her to train more because she's anxious. So her anxiety literally wakes her up. And that lack of sleep is obviously detrimental to Riley's brain activity. So we see all the emotions together on the outskirts of the brain trying to get back to HQ. It's essentially the same plot as the first Inside Out, except new emotions are in control, and now those emotions are intentionally hindering Riley's success because they think it's good for her, even though it's objectively not, which is also similar to the first one. But of course, anxiety is the antagonist of this film, at least for most of it. It's it was pointed out to me after the movie that it was very, very similar to the first film, and I do concede that point that they did copy and paste that formula very similarly. That our main core emotions that are our heroes have been cast out of headquarters and are trying to get back so that they can save Riley while she's going through a very traumatic experience. And Riley's emotions are now being controlled haphazardly by the emotions that are remaining, and they aren't really aware of what they're doing and aren't very good at what they're doing. And so it's changing Riley actively and hurting her. So I would concede that they are similar. I just feel like there is still differences in the emotions that are present and how it affects Riley, and the journey that the protagonist emotions go on is different in order to come to the realization of what Riley needs. Obviously, I think the first one is a little more poetic in the idea that sadness is an important emotion. And I don't think Inside Out 2 sticks the landing. It sticks the landing as best as it could because sadness is very obviously an emotion that we should have and that we want to have and that we want to experience, and that a lot of people enjoy having that feeling of sadness, being able to feel alive because of that feeling of sadness. And anxiety is certainly an emotion that most people would agree is very much detrimental to existence and only helpful in incredibly small amounts. So it's easier to make anxiety than antagonist emotion and harder to stick the landing of anxiety is still an emotion and we still need to be able to process it. And it's still important for its own reason, just because we know how we don't want anxiety a lot. We want very, very little of anxiety in our lives. But I still think for tackling such a complex subject, and even the even bigger complex subject of self-awareness and identity and realism around identity, I think it does a really good job, particularly because when anxiety takes over and she puts those anxiety core memories down to the pool, and the anxiety cores create a new identity for Riley. My favorite part of the movie is when she goes and she twings the identity. Hear what it says. Instead of saying something good, like before it said, I am a good person, now it's saying, I'm a terrible person or I'm awful, something like that. It's this inner voice that's in you that is now tearing you down, and anxiety is upset by it. It's not what anxiety was trying to do, but when unchecked, that's what happens with anxiety is you get this inflated version of yourself. And I think the valuable lesson at the end of it, at the end of the whole Inside Out 2, when they bring the flood of memories back into the pool at the bottom and they regrow the core, and it is working with the anxiety, and it creates this brand new brilliant core that is so much bigger and so much brighter and so much more full of life. uh when they twing it, I can't remember exactly what it says, but it says something very self-aware. It says something like, I am a real person. I do good things. I do bad things. Something like that. Where it's this very self-realized version of Riley that they can twing, and it's not an overconfident I am a good person, completely ignoring bad mistakes of the past, and it's not an I am a terrible person, completely inflating the sense of negative worth in Riley's mind. It is a very self-realized, full-bodied version of Riley, which I think is very, very positive. And I think a lot of people go throughout life saying I'm a good person without fully understanding themselves and ignoring parts of themselves that could be improved or could be worked on or could be critiqued in a very real and very effortful, productive way. And they go through life saying I'm a good person, which can be as detrimental as walking around saying I'm a terrible person, even if you're not. It's the idea that your identity, who you think you are, needs to be in tune with who you actually are and needs to be accurate. And that's where self-awareness comes from. And so I think Inside Out 2 is very, very smart in trying to handle that as the development of puberty, that you are now becoming aware of yourself and you're becoming aware of those emotions that are inside you and how to control them. And you're becoming aware of how your actions have consequences and how to behave and how to control yourself and who you really are as a person, who Riley is as a person. And that's a very, very important thing to learn. And she goes through that. There are trials and there are tribulations, and she pushes her friends away and then gets them back, and she has a panic attack because anxiety becomes uncontrolled. And finally, she learns how to control those negative aspects of herself and understands that it is a part of who she is, and she's owning it. And she's not dismissing it. She's not pushing it down. She's not hiding from it. She's owning who she is because she's self aware of who she is. And that's really, really smart. And I think it's a good ending. I think it's a good thing to touch upon, that these emotions that, when introduced with puberty, we think are initially bad, have positive aspects to them. And that when working with all of your other emotions and under control, they all they can all manage a person well, and you can become self-aware as that person. I think it's smart. It's definitely very therapeutic. It definitely is covering a much, much more complicated topic than the first Inside Out, which is the biggest detriment to Inside Out 2, is that it has to cover so much exposition very, very quickly at the beginning, which really hurts the pacing. I think the pacing has an issue throughout in terms of giving character moments and taking its time with the characters. It very much is rushing between the A story of the protagonist trying to get back to headquarters and the B story of the antagonist controlling emotions, controlling Riley's emotions and her actions. It cuts too quickly between the two, and we don't have a moment to sit with them and really understand how they're processing everything that's going on with Riley. There's just so much going on, and it feels like it could have been maybe like 20 minutes longer just to give some breathing room, and they didn't want to do that because it's a kids movie. They want to rush through it. They want to get to the point so that parents can go home and their kids don't have to sit for too long in the theater. And I think it's a little detrimental, but that's only because it's covering such a complicated topic compared to the first movie, which is simply a balance of these core emotions, and that sadness is an essential emotion just like the rest of them, is a much simpler topic to handle with a very straightforward premise of it being a journey to get back to headquarters, which they copied for this movie, but then complicated it on top of that by sending Sadness back, having her conflict with embarrassment. There was just a lot of moving parts in this movie, and I don't think they gave enough time to fully sit with it. And so that sort of takes away from a bit of the enjoyment. But overall, still a great movie. Still very enjoyable, just like the first one. Had a great ride. The characters are all fantastic. The vocal performances are absolutely phenomenal, like in most Pixar movies, and it's just absolutely thrilling. I had a very good time. So out of five nostalgias, I'll give it four. I'll give it 4 out of 5, which I think is very solid for a Pixar sequel. And of course, It is killing it at the box office. So, Ryan, if you are listening to this, go fuck yourself. You're getting destroyed, brother. Your movies are getting demolished by mine. Inside Out 2 is crushing it. Dune 2, which was my fourth pick, still killing it. Kung Fu Panda 4, a solid last choice. And I've still got Deadpool 3, which is coming out soon and going to kill it. And Joker 2, which is coming out close to the end of the year, is also going to kill it. You are screwed, my friend. You are demolished effectively immediately. I've won. I'm sorry to say this, but with Inside Out 2 doing this well, I'm afraid you've lost, my friend, yet again. I will claim 2 box office drafts in a row, and I feel like a god because of it. Perhaps my own self-worth has become inflated in the process of talking about this, but I do feel very, very powerful having beat you now twice, Ryan. And I'm saying this now in July. I mean, there's still months left. And I know if you were here, you'd be saying, yeah, I don't know, it could be anyone's game. There's still a chance. But no, I won. My prediction for Inside Out 2 was 900 million, and it is projected to do much more than that. I am blowing you out of the water, my friend. Oh, absolutely wonderful. I am beyond thrilled. Anyway, that's all the time we have. If you'd like to give your thoughts on the show, you can email us at theboxofficeshowpod@gmail.com. If you like the show, please give us 5 stars, whatever podcast app you're listening to, and be sure to tune in next week. Have a great rest of your day. I gotta redo that because I skipped that part. Anyway, that's all the time we have. If you'd like to give your thoughts on the show, you can email us at theboxofficeshowpod@gmail.com. Our main title theme for the show is Sundown by Joseph McDade. And if you like the show, please give us 5 stars, whatever podcast app you're listening to. And be sure to tune in next week. Have a great rest of your day.